Another episode here of Getting There with Goss, where we talk about the career journeys of media members, coaches, athletes, business owners, and more from upstate New York. You might know him from the sports scene, from sports radio and more. Dave Schultz joins us. Dave, for those who may not be familiar with your career, take us to a younger version of you, 6, 7, 8 years old. Where'd you grow up? What'd you want to be as a kid? And was it that same dream job you wanted when you were 18 years old?
No, I went to, I'm from I'm just outside of Syracuse, New York. I went to Jamesville DeWitt High for upstate New Yorkers. That's, Brandon, Trish, the Routons, and the Boeheim kids all went there well after me. More Bernard Blunt time. He was just after I was in terms of basketball there. I wanted to be a lawyer and a judge. My father was a longtime town judge. The courtroom is named after him, Judge Jack Schultz. And I wanted to do that. And that changed in October 1985.
Ooh, you left me with a little tease right there. October 1985. Pay out the tease for me.
So it was a Saturday morning. Got up. My mother said, I said, I'm not going to be bothered at 1:30. The Yankees and the Blue Jays are coming on. And she's like, all right, well, clean out the garage and go rake some leaves. Right. And said, okay, we'll do that. The Yankees had won the night, but the Yankees needed to win all 3 games just to tie. The Blue Jays, that was their first division title. And Phil Niekro, they came from behind on a Friday, like Lloyd Mosby, Gold Glove winner. Lloyd Mosby drops a fly ball, and Butch Weiniger hits like a go-ahead game-winning home run, 2 things that never happened ever. And they won Friday night. Phil Niekro was going to go for 300 again on Sunday, but they needed to win on Saturday to force that ball game. And it was a brutal Toronto, October day, either late September, early October. Last weekend of the season, 45, rainy, brutal, but Exhibition Stadium was packed, and everyone looked like they were having a great time. And as much of a Yankee fan as I was, I saw all the Blue Jays come through. They were eventually the Syracuse Chiefs affiliate. And, Willie Upshaw at first, Thomas O. Garcia at second, Tony Fernandez at short. Rance Mulliniks didn't come through Syracuse, but Ernie Witt did. And, of course, Dave Steve did. And then, although they may not have been original Blue Jays, they all came through Syracuse. George Bell, Lloyd Mosby, and Jesse Barfield. And Tom Henke was the closer, right? And, the Yankee broadcast came on. And, wow, how great would it be to be there? And then whoa, these guys must be getting paid to be there. So that's when I decided I wanted to be a baseball announcer back in October of 1985.
All right, so you have the new dream now to be a baseball announcer. You realize people get their paychecks signed to do that for a living, which is an amazing realization as a kid. You're like, okay, people get to do this and I want to do this. So what's the next step for you? Do you decide to pursue it professionally? Do you do the college route? And if you decide on college, what school do you pick and why?
I ended up at Oswego. It was a good choice. I have really no regrets going to Oswego. I didn't get into Newhouse. I did get into Syracuse, but I didn't get into Newhouse. And I guess I just felt more comfortable at Syracuse, or at Oswego, rather. We went up, we visited a couple of times. I visited American a couple of times. Maybe I just didn't want to go to school quite next door to where I grew up, just a little bit further away. And I had a great experience at Oswego. Ended up being the sports director at the radio station. The basketball team that just went to the Sweet 16, they weren't doing radio for the basketball team. So I got radio for the basketball team up and going. Hockey, which is still very big, had the games on. And maybe they're starting to do baseball now. I don't know. I tried to do that, but that would have been one long telephone cord back in the day. So I started doing basketball there. We did a talk show there. My last 2 years there was Sports Chat, which I eventually came full circle with that. But I was trying to figure out, how can I make this better, right? We're talking like Oswego sports and some other stuff. I ended up getting my senior year. I think I got Dick McPherson, Lee Steinberg, and Tom Jackson all on a different show, but as the weeks progressed. So that was pretty cool. Dick McPherson had just finished up being Syracuse head coach. All I did was call the Patriots, and they said, sure. And Lee Steinberg, I think they had the number 1 pick, and he came on, and Tom Jackson came on. I almost got John Madden. I don't know how I got a hold of his office, but I did. There's no real internet back then. We're still on AOL.com. So I probably just called from the radio station phone, and I almost got John Madden, but I didn't quite get it. But
I think we need to offer some perspective here, because now the booking process for guests is you can reach out via social media, you can email,
sure.
you can find somebody's cell if you dig deep enough. Like, it's a whole different process. We're talking the early 90s at this point when you're trying to book a guest. So you were just straight up cold calling people. Are you saying, hey, I'm a student in Oswego? Or are you just saying the call letters and it's Oswego? Is there a little strategy to how you're trying to book?
No, I probably wasn't smart enough to hide what I was doing. I was probably a student station at Oswego. So I actually got Tom Jackson. I think I called information, got his home. I don't even know how that happened. And I left a message, and I think he called me back, and he goes, I can't do it this week. My father just passed away, or my father was sick. I think his father actually passed away. So he was busy that week. And so a couple weeks later, I called him back, and he's still doing the Sunday stuff at ESPN. Called him back, left a message. Hey, we'd love to have you on. If you're up for it, please let us know. And at Oswego, on campus, it's one ring. And if it rings twice, it's off campus. So, we don't have anybody answering the phones. And, at Oswego State, there's 3 of us in there. 2 of us are on the microphone, and the other one is on the microphone, but he's running the board and answering the phone. So you can hear the phone ring. And then so we were talking, the phone rang, and we were waiting for the second ring, and it rang a second time. And then we went to break, and it was Tom Jackson on the phone. And my buddy, one of the co-hosts, was a Broncos fan, as it turns out. So it was a lot of fun. And, those are 3 pretty good guests to go out in your senior year.
Pretty good guests for sure. And I don't want to leave the John Madden story empty there. So take us through that process. Who did you call? Did you call back multiple times, just hoping it would pay off?
I probably just, followed up a couple of times. I got a hold of his assistant, and his assistant wasn't promising me anything. It was always a maybe. And it was not more than probably he had an office, whatever it was, out in San Francisco, right? It's 3 or Oakland. It was 3 hours difference where he was. And so, I was hoping he would call, but he didn't. And I don't think I bothered the next week. It may have been the final show. I may have been holding him off for the final show, and he didn't call. That's okay. I really probably didn't expect him to. I'm shocked when I can get an Alabama blogger to come on my show now. So I certainly wasn't expecting John Madden to show up on a show at Oswego State.
Well, you still punch through with some awesome guests there your senior year. You're doing great things at Oswego, but like we find out, so many college students who are having a great time in college, they eventually tell you have to leave, you graduate, You go on to the real world. So take us through that process of post-graduation. Were you able to land an internship post-Oswego, a job? Were you getting a paycheck? Take us through maybe the first opportunity you're offered post-graduation.
So I had interned in New York City in 1989 with USA Network, and I met a couple of guys that became production assistants, ABC and CBS, and they were at least a year older than I was. So they had jobs. So they could hook me up with production assistant jobs with the U.S. Open and Major League Baseball and so forth. And so I went to the All-Star game in 91, which was in Toronto. And then I ended up at the playoffs for Toronto and didn't get to the World Series because Minnesota beat them. But I think I probably swiped a Baseball America directory from the front offices of the Toronto Blue Jays. I didn't know what Baseball America was, but it had forget the major leagues. It had all the minor league contacts. So I swiped the book, and I went back home, and I'm not sure why I went to Syracuse University and use their stuff. Maybe they had better equipment or something like that. But I went there, and I ended up sending, it had to be 160, 170 letters to all the major league teams and all the minor league teams. The Richmond Braves, turns out, was the first one to reply, and they said you should go to the winter meetings, which was on Miami Beach at the Fontainebleau Hotel. Nothing like it was now. It's kind of a 1970, this is 1991. And so this was kind of 1975 Vegas cheesy stuff. So it's got a remake since then, but it was a lot of fun. Scott Boras was yelling. No, it's the other way around. Lou Piniella was yelling at Scott Boras. Butch Hobson is in a loud blazer with his shirt open and chains hanging down. And it was pretty cool. And we had a good time. I ended up getting a job out in Wichita, Kansas as a media intern, I guess.
So let's clarify this too, I think, because there's a little mix up here, because your talk show there at Oswego is successful. you still are pursuing the baseball gig. And for a timeline, we're in the infancy of sports talk radio. So it doesn't really exist at this point. Maybe FAN is like really like maybe 1 year or 2 years. There's not a lot of stations.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Yeah, FAN was a few years old. That in fact, that's what just happened. We were just at the Barrett Sports Media Summit, and Mike Francesa and Chris Russo were there, and I finally got to ask Russo because he was doing a big thing back in the summer of '89 because the Yankees stunk and Mattingly was good, but the Giants were really good and Will Clark was really good, and so he was arguing that Will Clark was better than Don Mattingly. So that was 1989. I think FAN came on maybe a year or two before that. But no, I knew I always wanted to do baseball compared to doing sports talk at that point in time. It never occurred to me to try and go get a sports talk job back in 1991. I was going to do baseball, and probably having the blinders on was a little bit that probably hurt me moving forward. But I was in baseball from 1992 to 2004.
92 to 2004. So I love how we still have the connection here with the radio. You set me up well with the tease. You give me the little guys. Here's where we're going with this. So you said it hurt you. Is that because you're not getting on air like you hope? Because you mentioned an internship, you're doing media stuff. Are you bouncing market to market? Kind of take us through why you feel like you might have made a different decision reflecting on it back now.
Well, because I was so focused on doing baseball, right? And the big leagues is the big leagues. It doesn't have to be Major League Baseball. Now, I could do basketball, but I hadn't really done it up until recently. And I, was not going to do football. And even now I do high school football, and I try to make it as simple as possible for me. My color guy's really good in football, but I try to make it as simple as possible. But I'll give you a good example. Brian Anderson, okay? Brian Anderson took a circuitous route to the big leagues. Brian Anderson is on, TNT and TBS. He's the voice of the Brewers, and he does golf, and he'll do some NCAA stuff this week as well. But he was in the minor leagues, and then he got minor league golf. It was probably the Nike tour back in the day. I met him while I was in between broadcasting gigs, and if you watch a Nike tour event, there's not a whole lot of people there. But he turned that into a Brewers job, and then he turned it into a basketball job, and he's had a pretty good career over the last 15 years or so. But I was so focused on just doing baseball, I probably missed on some opportunities. Let's see here. JP Shadrick is another great example. So JP was in the same boat I was. In fact, at one point in time, I was the Jacksonville Suns broadcaster, and then JP was. And then JP got a AAA job. I think he did it for a year, and he was about
Rochester.
No.
Okay.
JP. No. JP is from down south. I think he's an Alabama grad. And but we both. I think he followed me. You know what? It would have been almost. I was there 97, 98, so he probably would have been there well after me, actually. So he got there, and he did a couple of years with Jacksonville, and then he got up to AAA Oklahoma City, and he ended up going back to Jacksonville to go in-house and do in-house video stuff and podcasts and, digital shows. And so, he's in the big leagues, right? And now he's doing play-by-play on the weekends for Touchdown Radio. So he's in the big leagues. I'm still in AA down here in Mobile.
When we are seeing these baseball opportunities come, we know it's the spring, we know it's the summer. So you have other times, and you are from Syracuse. In this late 90 era, this is when 620 WHEN is starting to launch a little bit. Did you have any experience there locally in central New York doing stuff with those radio stations?
I did. Well, I worked when I ended up back home. I helped my father get reelected one last time in 2005. And I worked overnights at WSYR, and I filled in at 620 when given the chance. Brent Axe had me fill in, probably Bud and the Man-Child I filled in. It's a great story. And it's a ridiculous Syracuse thing. All right. It's just a ridiculous thing. So I had been in minor league baseball. This is the first year I don't have a job in minor league baseball. First time I don't have a year-round job. I guess I did have an overnight job on the weekends at SYR, but I was basically George Costanza. I'm at home and live with my parents. And so I would fill in on 620 when given the chance. and I'd fill in for the Chiefs when given the chance. I'm probably the third option, but when the broadcaster, Bob McGillicuddy, would go to TV, he would need somebody to fill in and do radio. So it was either me or Matt Park and maybe even somebody else. So the Chiefs had a thing that lasted in the paper for like 4 days. They changed some songs that they weren't going to play, like YMCA and what's a Dancing Joe song or something like that.
Cotton Eye Joe.
What's that?
Cotton Eye Joe? Yeah.
That's it. And so whatever it was a half a dozen songs. And so it became a thing in the summer in New York. And I suggested on the radio, I was like, and we're just taking what's in the paper. Okay. Admittedly, we're taking what's in the paper. I didn't even think about calling the Chiefs, which I probably would do today. But we're taking what's in the paper, and it's not that big of a deal. It's a couple of songs, but I suggested, instead of just telling what songs you're not going to play, suggest what songs you are going to play. Right. And so I got offered to fill in, and then I was told to show up in John Simone's office. And he basically threatened me, he threatened me that if I ever went on the air again and said anything poorly about the Chiefs, that, he would end my career, which I didn't particularly like. I didn't probably react as well as I should have. I probably should have told him to stuff it and walk out and, you figure out what you're going to do with baseball and your radio and TV broadcast tonight. But I didn't. I kept my mouth shut and just did the radio for a couple of bucks. And it was ridiculous because he didn't get the whole story from me. He certainly didn't hear what I said, because I certainly didn't say anything inflammatory about his organization or anything like that. But, for a guy that he hired me like way back when, before I moved to Jacksonville, for a couple of weeks to call ticket renewals or something like that. But he certainly had every opportunity to hire the hometown kid to do the hometown team. And I never got the chance on a regular basis. So that's a crazy story that, Bob McGillicuddy will absolutely be able to confirm, because he was there while it was happening.
Amazing.
You didn't think that
those stories crazy? Yeah. Is it like the Samoans and like how that, I guess legacy would be the right term to use here, of how that changed, especially with the tail end of it, and how people viewed the Chiefs there in Central New York, because there was just such poor attendance and the ownership change and everything else. But you saw it firsthand and you went through all that stuff, right?
Well, I mean, they put the stadium in the wrong spot, right?
Yes,
that was all political. They put the stadium at the same spot. The stadium should have been smaller, although at the time you still needed 10,000 in AAA. But they should have made it smaller with grassy knoll, and they should have made it downtown, right? It would have been right there by Armory Square or something along those lines, and you would have had 6,000 to 7,000 people going to all those restaurants and bars. 72 times a year, in the summer. So, that was a poor thing. Then, not only that, then they built it in the wrong direction, right? The sun sets in the first baseman's eyes. Like, he can't see. So, you better be prepared if you're sitting behind him. And it sets in the eyes of where they had the barbecue, the picnic area. Yeah. And they've shifted all this around. Now everything's out in left field, but they had it out in right field. And if I'm having a picnic or a barbecue out in right field, I can't see the game for, if it's, between June 1st and, August 15th, I'm missing half the game because the sun's directly in my eyes. So it was really too bad, because John Simone, John Simone in Texas, I grew up at the ballpark. I was part of the, the Knothole gang. I remember Don Fisher and Del Austin, and I told you all the guys that played before that. Mickey Klutz came through, the late, great Doug Ault, right? The Yankees came through, eventually. How great is this? The Yankees came through, and they didn't want any part of it, right? They didn't want any part of being there. Sparky Lyle, in his book, called us, podunk hicks. I eventually am calling ball games for the Somerset Patriots. Would you know it? Sparky Lyle is the manager, and he was great. And so we had some fun with that. He's a podunk king from Pennsylvania. So, but no, he was great. And I grew up there, and it was always disappointing that I never got a shot to be the voice of the Chiefs, because that would have been a lot of fun, not only for me, but for my family and my folks. I think would have really enjoyed it.
You've got these connections to upstate New York. You've touched on some cities you were able to call across your baseball broadcasting career. I got to find out, how do you end up in Miami?
So I did the baseball career thing. I came home. I had a job in Harrisburg, PA, and I tried to get on Sports Talk, and I wasn't very patient. All right. So I'm paying for the time, probably overpaying for the time, but I probably should have waited 6 months, but I wanted to hop on during football season, right? I got to take advantage of the Eagles, the Steelers, high school. Shady McCoy was a senior at Bishop McDevitt at that point in time. That's how old I am. He's already had his whole entire NFL career. So I jumped on that, and my father helped me out. I got a loan, but I was so paranoid about going into debt. I didn't have a paying job, and I wasn't very good at sales. So that was a problem. Always sales has been my issue. And so I just wasn't going to go into serious debt. So we shut it down after 3 months. Go home and, again, work for WSYR doing news overnights on the weekends and help my father get reelected. Well, I went to the winter meetings, and I had always gone to the winter meetings when available. And let's just do it one more time. A friend of mine had always said, if you're looking for a change of scenery, come down to Miami. And I figured I could get rejected from the beach just as easily as I could get rejected from the snow. So I ended up moving to Miami Beach, at North Miami Beach with my friend Jason, who I went to high school with. And I ended up working at 2 radio stations there for a bit before I got into the hospitality industry for a little bit.
Now, hang on a second. You passed on one of the radio stations. One of the radio stations down there you work for, if I'm not mistaken, is WQAM, formerly known as the Joe. And we're talking about
so that's right after. So I got down there. And I had like 3 things immediately. Clear Channel transferred my job down there. So now I'm doing news on the weekend days. So like noon to 8, something like that on WIOD. Okay. And I'm also doing updates at ESPN in West Palm for Evan Cohen, who is now on Mad Dog Radio with Mike Patrick. And so I was doing updates for that. I also volunteered for the golf tournament at Doral. Eddie Carboni was in charge, and this was the last year. 2006 would have been the last year of the Ford Championship. Then it turned to the World Golf Championship and just wasn't quite as popular for whatever reason. And I had a great time. I mean, this is all, guys, I'm telling you, we went out, we had the Pro-Am selection. And this is basically Who Golfs with Tiger, right? The only pro to show up at this event was Steve Stricker, by the way. Great guy. And so this is a Monday night in Miami. We asked the DJ at this event, where do we go? And he says Club Bed is really the place to go. And I have no idea where I'm going, right? I'm going from Doral, which is on the west side of the airport, to South Beach, which I hadn't really been down there yet. I've only been in Miami for a couple of months. We go to, somehow I found a parking spot around the corner. We're going to Club Bed. Shaquille O'Neal walks out. We're in the right spot. So then we walk in, and again, it's 12:30. I'm supposed to be at work, back at the golf tournament at 8 o'clock or whatever. But the boss is buying. Then we're in there for another hour and a half. Justin Rose, who's playing golf at that time, shows up, and the rest of the Miami Heat show up at that time. Although I don't think Dwayne Wade was there. But a lot of the Heat were there. So then I did hospitality. I got a job at the Jim McLean Golf School, which is on Doral at the time. It's now Trump, but before it was the driving range. If you go out to Doral, you hit the driving range. On the other side is a school, and I think it's the Rick Smith School now, Rick Smith's. But before it was the Jim McLean Golf School, not teaching golf by any stretch of the imagination, although I did cure my slice. I kind of oversaw the inside. I made sure people had lessons lined up and they were in the schools and the ratio to teacher to student was proper. And I did that for 2.5 years, I guess, just over 2 years. The economy crashed. And then eventually I got to Key Largo at a private club, the Ocean Reef Club, which you just don't stumble upon. If you don't know it's there, you're not finding it. You either took a wrong turn or missed your turn if you end up there. And it was really a special place. There's 2 golf courses there. There's actually a private golf course inside the private club. You can land smaller jets. You can bring in boats like up to 175 feet. It really is a magnificent place. But they kept on bringing up these motivational speakers that you got to be doing what you want to be doing. And so eventually I started a podcast. I'm really just talking to myself, but just trying to get in new reps because I I did a little QAM in there as well. You're right. I skipped QAM. I did that I was doing that for a couple years before I went to Key Largo, but I didn't have anything new. And so I started sending stuff out, and I ended up in Lafayette and then Mobile. But in there as well, in between Jim McLean and Key Largo, I was working for WQAM for about 2 years.
Yeah, because that whole process right there we went through. You go down to Florida, you get out of the snow, you're enjoying golf.
Right.
Great Florida golf, and you're out of the industry. Now, some people who might have here in 2022 said, I can get out of radio and move down to Florida and play golf, and I'll sign up right now. Like, there are some people who just heard that, like, that's good enough, right? But you still had a passion to do what you wanted to do. And just for offer some perspective for those who don't know the Miami area, the ticket is John Wiener, Stu Gatsu, people know him as Dan Le Batard. And that other side is Hank Goldberg, Sid Rosenberg. Those are some of the names that have been on the WQAM side. So it's a big deal. Even though Miami is not perceived as a huge sports town, like, this is a heavy hitter when we talk about sports radio stations across the country.
Right. 560 was the old guard, and 790 was the new guard. 790 is where Le Batard got his start doing radio. They'd make fun of the 560 guys because it was older guys breaking down the games, and we know Le Batard doesn't really break down the games, and I'm a huge Le Batard fan. But I was there for a couple years, and I guess I got auditioned. They give you some shows, and you don't realize that you're actually auditioning. And it was a big difference when you get a 3-hour show or a 4-hour show. And I was still, even though I'd done it in Pennsylvania, and in Pennsylvania it's a 2-hour show. How difficult can it be? Right? You talk, recap, guest, recap, next hour. You either have a guest at the top, or you do the same hour again with a different guest. And maybe you get more than 2 guests. Well, you're doing a nighttime show on QAM. I tried to have a new segment everything, and you don't need to do that. I learned listening to Colin Cowherd. He's like, whatever I say at 10 a.m. or whenever he's on, I can re-say it at 11:15, right? You can do it again at 12:45 and stuff like that. So you can, replay the hits, as they say. So I got pretty good experience down there in Miami for a couple of years. But yeah, I got a chance to go to Lafayette and now Mobile. So it's been a good 8 years in sports talk.
Well, let's talk about how the opportunity arises in Lafayette. How did it happen to go from Florida to Louisiana?
Well, Lafayette was, I answered an ad on All Access, and it's probably the fastest process I've ever had. I sent it in either Thursday night when I got home from work and did it then, or sent it Friday morning, had an email back by noon. Dave, thanks very much. Can we set up a time to talk on Saturday? Saturday came and went, and he said he got caught up with work. So I interviewed on Sunday, interviewed again on Monday with somebody else, and then was offered on Wednesday, negotiated, accepted on Thursday, gave notice on Friday.
It's just like, no, I've never had anybody have what you just said right there to make me go that. Usually it's like parking a ship in radio.
Yeah, I think it took me longer to get my first job. My first full-time job out of school was at Office Max, and that probably took a month. This took all of a week. I was willing, available, and cheap. Cheap probably actually being more the key to the case, and I had some experience, obviously. So I went off to Raging Cajun country. I showed up there Labor Day, right? They're off, or maybe I was late. Maybe I arrived like Labor Day that night. I was there for 2 days, and they put me on the air on Thursday, and I don't know how to say any names of anywhere, of anything. I had to have the phonetic saying of Acadiana, like Acadiana. Like I was calling it like Acadiana or something like that. I was not very good. And Chafalaya Basin and IWOA is Iowa everywhere else, but there it's Iowa. And then it was a lot of fun, and we had a great time. We did a great show for 5.5 years.
How would you describe the difference between a New York sports talk listener, a Florida sports talk listener, and now Louisiana? I feel like those are the three most opposite possible, but you know it from firsthand experience.
Very different. All right. So upstate New York, I think, not upstate New York, but the Northeast, probably a lot like Los Angeles and San Francisco and Chicago, right? They're going to complain. All right. If something doesn't go wrong or something doesn't go right, they're going to complain, right? Even New York City, Mike and the Mad Dog can probably break down the Mets lineup for 3 hours if they wanted to, right? And that would be a fine show. Miami, because it's an eclectic thing. And, you know, the Heat, when I got down there, they won the first championship with Dwayne Wade and Shaquille O'Neal, but it took a little bit of time. The Dolphins are a lot like the Knicks, one of the more overrated franchises of the last 30, 40 years. The Marlins, you know, they had a couple of runs, but really weren't doing anything when I got down there. Played in a tough stadium to go to. And the Panthers, I eventually covered the Panthers for a little bit, but they've been really good the last couple of years, but they were nothing but when I got down there. So, but it's all eclectic because, you know, everybody moves to Miami. So as much as they're Heat fans and Canes fans there, you know, everybody's from everywhere else. You could do a better show probably on the Yankees and the Red Sox down there than you can on the Marlins or the Mets. The Cajuns are a little bit different. So the Cajuns are, you know, they're the underdogs, right? They came down from the Acadianas in Quebec. They tried to go to New Orleans. They were shoved out to the swamps, and they're just the underdogs. So when they don't do well, they don't want to hear about it for the most part, okay? So they always expect not to do well, all right? Now that's changed a little bit. Billy Napier, now the coach at Florida, he did a great job with the football team. And before him, actually, Mark Hudspeth had turned around the football program before a couple things ended his tenure. I got down there in the baseball team. You see the hat back there? Can you see the head coach? They were the number one team in the nation. I showed up, and I'm not the biggest of college baseball fans, I can tell you that. But the Louisiana Raging Cajuns were the number one team in the nation. Of course, they lost their first game of the year to Eastern Illinois, but then they reeled off like 20 straight. Down there, they don't want to hear about it if it's not something good, right? I mean, Saints fans used to have bags over their heads, right? And so very rarely do you get the back and forth on if it's a bad game, right? They don't really want to hear it, except, you know, when they get screwed by a no call in the NFC Championship game. Not difficult to do a talk show that. And then if you get some Raging Cajuns and LSU crosstalk, that's even better. Will Wade, who just got fired from LSU in his first year, he took LSU to the NIT, and they played the Cajuns. And that was a big deal because the Cajuns had a great team, more wins, better RPI, but LSU just wasn't going to play the Cajuns in Lafayette. So if the Cajuns wanted to play LSU, they had to go to Baton Rouge, and it became a whole thing because he went off in the post-game press conference. He called a timeout to rub it into Bob Marlin's face. You know, they got away with a couple-point victory. And then my show is and now I got Cajuns and LSU fans going at it on my station. So it was a lot of fun down there. And again, my first year there, right, the Cajuns go to their third bowl game in 3 years. The basketball team goes to the NCAA tournament for the first time in almost a decade. They have the number one ranked baseball team. They host a super regional for the first time ever, although they did lose. And the softball team, which is big down there, and that's really the biggest difference between Central New York, although I guess Syracuse is doing better now. That's the difference between Central New York and Lafayette, is that, you know, local sports talk in Syracuse is going to end, you know, when the Syracuse basketball season ends. So think about it. We're not even at the NCAA tournament. It hasn't even tipped off yet. And local talk in Syracuse is about over. Right? What are we talking about?
Right. No, that's exactly right. Yeah.
About over. I mean, lacrosse isn't even as good as it used to be. So in Lafayette, I would get the Cajuns baseball and softball. And then eventually no one even said anything to me. I ignored LSU baseball until the end. And that's, you know, only a couple of guys named Aaron Nola is on that team and Alex Bregman are on that team. And so I didn't pick up on LSU baseball until my second year down there. But, you know, when LSU goes to, you know, the second to last game of the season, well, now that's talk all the way till June, right? That's the third week of June, right? What are we looking at? That's 3 more months of local sports talk.
And then you flip it over to the football, and then the camps will open back up, and there's your circle, and you're good to go. Yeah.
Right. So then I got a week. I got to worry about a week. I come home for 10 days. Then we got the All-Star break. Now we got SEC Media Days, and then I get a Sun Belt Media Day, and I got to worry about like 10 days of shows. In Central New York, I mean, your local talk is going to be, I mean, the Bell's got a stadium deal, it appears, and then you're talking Yankees, Mets, and Red Sox, and some Chiefs, but that's not really, local, right? It's not Syracuse University.
So things are going well in Louisiana, but as we know in the industry that is radio, changes happen. Take us through the transition from Louisiana and then you go into Mobile, Alabama.
Well, I got fired because I asked for a raise. I wasn't making very much money, and we increased revenue 80%, although I wasn't doing the sales. We increased the listenership at least 80%. By the time I left, we were number one in time spent listening in the demo, and I was unceremoniously fired just about 3 years, almost exactly 3 years ago. But because I had been through it in Florida for a little bit, I kept my head up. I kept a good attitude. There's no reason to get down. I like living in Lafayette. If I have to move home with my parents, oh well, I'll help out and enjoy my parents while they're still around. And when you know it, the voice of the Cajuns, Jay Walker, who technically is my competition, he's on. There's 2 sports talk stations in Lafayette, if you can imagine. And the former voice of South Alabama, called him looking for a talk show host and a program director. Jay recommended me. So, I don't know if I get that job, I don't know if I'm recommended, if I move, or, the idea was at the time, I got let go in March. I was going to leave. I can say that now, big talker. I would have left in Labor Day in 19 if I didn't get a raise. I can only do 6 years not making more money than I was. And so, the big what if, right? I'm a big what if guy, right? What if Billy Edelin doesn't get suspended for 10 days and McNamara's coming off the bench? Instead, he's suspended for 10 days and the legend of Jerry McNamara is realized. So what if I'm planning on quitting, but I don't tell anybody? I never find out about the job. So I don't know, fate, karma, whatever the case is. That's what happened. It was really only March, April, May, June is when I interviewed for the job. In fact, I was heading home on a Sunday and I got a call on a Thursday and they brought me in on a Friday. I interviewed for a couple of hours. Actually, one of the better interviews ever. Took me a happy hour afterwards. I thought I was going to get the offer right then and there, right? I mean, how often do you go and have some drinks during an interview? But for me, that would be never. And so I got offered the job about a month later, and ratings came out again, and I'm still the highest rated show here in Mobile.
Love it, man. Killing it out in Mobile. Happy to hear it. Now, I already gave you this connection here of Louisiana versus Florida versus New York, but there are hopefully some young sports talk radio aspiring hosts that hear Alabama sports talk here in March of 2022 and think, isn't that the dream job? Like, you talk college football all day. You have the passionate callers. Is it what people might perceive from the outside, that a city in Alabama wants to talk college football and the phones are lighting up all day to talk about it? Or is that not necessarily the case?
Yeah, they don't. I don't know if it's just me. We get some callers in Lafayette. I don't get very many callers in Mobile. We have an app that they, put their messages on, and we read the messages. We get calls once in a while. One of the bigger days we got calls was when actually the Auburn head football coach was hired, Brian Harsin. But otherwise, we don't get a whole lot of reaction to the games. I know people are listening because the ratings show it, but we don't get a lot of calls. But for people who are interested, I think the one thing that, they could do it on their own, right? I mean, we got the next round, which is in Birmingham. They were on Jocks in Birmingham, and that's one of the great radio stations, sports talk stations in America. They went out on their own. The guys in Nashville, who had one of the top rated sports talk shows in America in Nashville, they went to Outkick 360. Dan Lebitard is not on the radio anymore. Pat McAfee, he's on XM, but he's not technically on the radio. There's a guy, Jake Crane. I think it's Crane and Company now. But this kid was a South Alabama baseball player. He was like a special teams coach with Montana State. COVID hits, loses his job, and just starts doing a podcast, just starts doing video like in his parents' basement or something like that. And he's gone from Colin Cowherd's podcast to the Daily Wire to, according to him, he's the number one sports podcast in America. And I saw him, I think I lined him up. My first time was right after Memorial Day weekend in June of 20, right in the middle, right as COVID was hitting. So he has done it, and he's never been on the radio one time. He's never had a radio show, and he's just on digital. And, you know, if you got something to say and you can say it in an entertaining way, everyone could do it on their own, you know, from Facebook to YouTube to podcasting. You know, I think that's the thing now. You don't need a radio station to have your voice be heard.
See, I'm glad we've clicked throughout this interview. Even though we had a few occasional chats, you knew where that question was going to go. Some heard that question for the setup for the call and thought I was going to have you talk about how many, but that's old school. And that's not a disrespectful thing. Like, you feel it every single day where the listener of sports talk radio from like 1999 and maybe even like 2009 is not 2022. They want to listen how they want to listen, when they want to listen. They want to find the podcast they want. You mentioned some people. You've got the phone right there on our visual side. I don't want to lump myself in that group of people you just mentioned, but as someone who went from radio to podcast, I like this a lot more. Like, you know, this is not to my own horn, but like the sponsors are here. You know, like people used to chop into that money when I was in radio. I like the fact that doesn't get chopped anymore. So like this can happen. You mentioned the podcast. Your podcast is crushing it. Like, I feel like you just get just as much as feedback from the podcast world, and you've been doing it for a decade.
So we should probably start some individual podcasts. Our podcasts are just our shows, but you know, our ratings came out, and so the Q, and it's a math equation, right? So it's just an estimation. So we have about 18,000 listeners. Well, my podcast last week or the last 2 weeks was over 17,000, and that's actual listeners,
right?
So it's absolutely out there for people to do, and you don't need a radio station for anyone to hear you.
I think that's a good setup for our closing question. It is getting there with guys. We've talked about your career journey. So for that young sports radio host, that young baseball broadcaster, the best advice, if you're maybe a senior at Oswego right now, what's the best advice you could offer somebody hoping to get to their part of the career that you are right now?
Well, hopefully they'd be farther than me, but I'd be more aggressive. I would also be better at sales because you'll make money. That's where the money is. If you're coming out of school and being a broadcaster and you're not in a big market, you got to do sales. Whether you're on, I don't know how you could do it if you're on TV, but in radio, they'll let anybody do sales. That would be my big time advice because that's where you make the money so you can do the fun stuff. But also, if things aren't going as quickly as you think, hang in there, but they should be going faster. The good ones get to where they're going usually pretty quick. The Matt Vasgersians in the world, you know, they were there in the minor leagues. He put his time in, but he was doing like 5 or 6 years. I got buddies who are in the minor leagues for over 20 years, right? I mean, you know, and including me, technically. So, you know, I would be more aggressive. And if you get the opportunity, when I was with the Somerset Patriots in New Jersey, I just wasn't aggressive enough. You know, I just turned 30. I got New York is there. Philadelphia is there. Even, you know, some major stations in Jersey are there. I probably should have made more contacts while I was there. I needed to be more aggressive in meeting more people to help me. Also, as much as it is a good advice to get advice from broadcasters, get their advice on how to broadcast, not how to get the jobs. You got to find out who's doing the hiring. It's nice to know the broadcasters, but they're not doing the hiring. And usually you're trying to take their job. So find out who's doing the hiring, and you want to be able to contact them much more than the broadcasters. Certainly contact the broadcasters. Always good to have them in your back pocket and learn from them, but you need to find out who's actually doing the hiring.
There you go. Dave Schultz. Dave, appreciate it. By the way, for our audio side, the visual side, seeing it the whole broadcast, we both have like matching Syracuse basketball posters. Yeah. You've got, I think mine's the year after the national championship. Yours might be the national championship poster I see behind you.
It is. You got it autographed. Mine's autographed. That's
mine doesn't have any autographs. He beat me.
I
think my parents have the one that has the autographs on it.
I have them framed in my office, but Boeheim would come to DeWitt Rotary every year, and my father would buy a poster and it's $25, and it goes to Coaches versus Cancer. So that's what. And this is the least of the framed. That's the best poster I got, and I got things that are framed, $150. This thing is in a Walmart special.
Well, I'm a Salve guy. I've told you that before. Next time you're in Central New York, you let me know. We'll grab Dinosaur, Tully's. I'll take you down to a Salve hidden gem called Sam's Chicken Land. You take me to one of your spots. We'll be good to go. All right.
I appreciate it. Thanks very much for having me.